Welcome to the Amirdrassil version of the Race to World First coverage. I'm Tuttles, joined by Dratnos, live, in person, front lines, giving you the up-to-date and best knowledge about what we can about what's going on in the Race to World First. Dratnos, how's your day been?
Pretty good. Got up at the crack of noon, walked on over to the site. Yeah, it's pretty. I'm of course here. I'm here in Sweden for the Echo Race to World First event.
Dude,
So
and so yeah, with being on site at the Race to World First event for Echo, there's been an interesting announcement by Echo, and I mean we could show this as well. It seems as if they made a video talking about. Wait, this is not the right Echo video. Talking
yeah,
about the fact that they're going NA.
yeah, a little Discord call between Scripe and Ian.
Hey man, so this is really rough without global release. Winning is gonna be hard. Can you help us out here?
Frankly, that's a skill issue.
Wait, what? Man, that's it. We're going in A.
Okay, so very interesting. I think I think that you probably know what's going on, and I think that you probably shouldn't say anything. I think that I'm going to speculate as to what's happening with this Echo going NA thing, based off what I've seen and some of the stuff that I found. What I think is going on is Echo is doing. They're going to raid probably somewhere between 3 to 5 hours, depending on NA maintenance on NA, and either do heroic fire rack, do normal Amirdrassil, or do the first couple of bosses on Mythic. I think that heroic or normal is probably the most likely, and they just do a walkthrough on heroic or normal, and we kind of they kind of see what the bosses are looking like, and they can kind of also tell what their pathing through the raid is going to be on the next reset. And the reason that I believe that's because, first off, they wouldn't have announced this today. This is something that would have happened months ago. They would have had to have had characters prepped for months. They're not springing this on people. It's not an issue of helpers or anything else. It's more just this is not going to be something that's sprung on people. There's also the guild has been found, and these are not the most geared characters I've ever seen. And so if they're doing this on NA, we got some problems. I think we have people like Love America and Show Boomy here rounding out the list. Do you have anything you want to say about the Echo to NA thing?
Yeah, Sweden it's a hoax. We're actually in Minnesota. We've the Echo players all got visas over the past few months, so we're able to come raid in NA. And the guild you found there is one of many red herring guilds. They've been actually prepping multiple different characters, but a lot of them aren't gilded, so they could avoid suspicion. Starting tomorrow, when the NA servers come up, they're gonna log in, and they're gonna be all of them will form up into the Echo NA guild, which is on an unnamed server.
So Love America, hoax.
Love America, yeah. Again, look, it's a hoax character. This is a red herring guild designed to throw you off the scent.
Croissant Kid.
Yeah. There's some good ones down there.
Chicken Lidl.
Yep. Oreo milkshake.
Okay, that's good. Well, that's just a good name.
Yeah.
But yeah, overall, I don't expect that this is going to be anything radical from Echo. It does open up the question as to whether or not they would ever legitimately raid on NA, which the answer is maybe, but with a bit more prep.
Yeah, the Sweden to NA ping is not as good as the London to NA ping, which Limit, of
That's
course,
true.
once did from London to NA, but
Yeah.
that's like 50 less ping than Sweden to NA, so they'd have to find a new venue, which they did in Minnesota. That's where we're playing from this tier, so
Yeah.
That's the lore.
Okay, so in addition to that, just from kind of talking to some of the players when we were at BlizzCon, we know that it seems as if they're prepping 12 characters apiece. This is definitely going to be one of the most extensive Race to World Firsts in regards to character preparation that I think we've ever seen.
Yeah, splits are so they're kind of worse than they used to be, right? Because you can't log off and hold loot on characters, but you can trade around, right? Because so the item trading timer, this is a change made for Aberrus, does not it still progresses when you're offline, which makes the process of running splits a lot less efficient, which means just play more characters. Now, unlike Aberrus, it's unlikely this tier will be easy to do with a bunch of helpers because the item level jump is bigger and because Aberrus was also easier than normal at any given item level. So
Sure.
the combination of those factors means you probably can't have as many helpers in any given split, which means, yeah, I suspect we're going to be in for a lot of days of splits of, mostly, like, I don't think it'll be 15 raiders, 15 helpers. I think it'll probably be like 25 raiders and maybe 5 helpers or something on some of these.
I think that's something that, like, for those who are really paying attention, Dratnos mentioned that the item level is higher, and it's something that's like, it's pretty overlooked. So most tiers is about a 26 item level jump from last year's Mythic to next year's Mythic. This tier is actually 39, so it's 3 tier levels of difference. You had the exact same gear going into, if you rated Mythic this last year in Aberrus, you have the exact same gear going into normal Amirdrassil, which is like, that's a chasm. That is a chasm. You normally have the same gear as Heroic, and it's like hard to get up. It's hard to get upgrades and stuff like that. Right now, it'll
be more similar to the start of an expansion, right? Where we came into Vault Incarnates at like 389, which is 390, something like that, which is close to that 39 below the 424 that Razageth dropped, right?
Exactly.
Or the 415 that the earlier Mythic bosses dropped. So
exactly.
Yeah, it's a big jump in gearing. Also put some more pressure on M+, maybe being something that you do. You run some splits, you figure out whose mains whose, and then maybe you go do M+ before doing a serious amount of Mythic progression for like an actual full day's worth of time. Historically, that's not been something that guilds have done. Although last year, Liquid did do like a half day of M+ to avoid showing strats on Echo of Neltharion one day, which maybe that. But I think this time around, maybe we'll see 2 guilds, both 3 guilds, all guilds go and do a dedicated M+ day sometime during the first week.
So Liquid are the incumbent Race to World First champions. I'm really interested in seeing how they defend. For a while, it was seeming like Echo was... A lot of people had Echo as like massive favorites, but Liquid really showed up last year and played quite well.
Yeah, and I think we've always basically stressed, like, it's foolish to describe either Echo or Liquid as massive favorites, right? Like, Echo and Liquid are massive favorites over the field, including Method, who are the closest now, and Method have been ramping. At some point, they may well be competitive for World First, but I'm still going to have to see it to leave it, right? Like, they still have this big challenge to solve of, actually progressing a boss from ahead and, winning, right? And that is a big gap from where they were in previous tiers. This could be the tier that it happens, of course, but I would say that's like less than that's a low single digit percentage chance at best.
Typically
it's probably if you're far away from 50-50, I would bet whichever team you had lower than 50.
Yeah, I was gonna say we typically give it about 50-50 equity. I think it ultimately comes down to like how does strategy work out for both of the guilds, and ultimately at the end of the day, it's just like how do they play, like what strategies do they come up with on the bosses themselves beforehand, but during the race as well, and also like how does strategy evolve over time after seeing how other guilds have progressed the fights. Overall, for Amirdrassil testing and Fire Rack and stuff like that, how are you feeling about the raid just generally? I mean, there was a decent amount of testing. People did Mythic all the way through Tendrassil, Sage Swift. What's the difficulty looking like? Is it harder than Aberrus, you think?
The PTR testing, I think, was fairly easy in the sense that like the bosses weren't too complicated. I think the strategies it was possible to develop effective strategies from the PTR testing. Sometimes they test these bosses on PTR, they Mythic test, and you only see P1, and you're not going to like get a good idea of what the later parts of the fight even do. And I don't think that was this time. I think that especially the Race to World First guilds saw the entirety of the fights that were being PTR tested. So I think strategically they're going to be well equipped for every boss up to Farak. Most of them haven't had like big data mined changes since their testing. The ones that did, like Naimu, had a second testing. So yeah, I think we're going to see well prepared guilds against like I think they're going to be pulling with a very similar strat to what they killed a boss with up until probably Farak, but
yeah.
That could change. There could be undata mined changes to these fights.
I mean, we've actually, if you've been paying attention to anything data mine related, it's actually there've been a lot of changes in regards to what's happening on Farak, like the encounters specifically with numbers that are changing. This is fairly typical. Like, it's something that you'll see pop up on Wowhead from time to time. So it's like, it's important to kind of keep an eye on in regards to like what you expect. But at the end of the day, like if the boss has never been pulled, it's kind of hard to put into context like what these changes are actually doing, right?
If they nerf an ability from 1,000 damage to 100 damage, and it's a live game mechanic, like usually you have a pretty good idea, like, oh, that's going to be,
Yeah.
that's not going to matter anymore, right? But on bosses that haven't been tested at all, there have been a lot of bosses where they've nerfed a mechanic and the bosses come out and it's still super OP and needs to be nerfed again. Sometimes it gets nerfed into oblivion or into irrelevance, yes, but basically, like, you don't have a good frame of reference if a mechanic is going to be hard or easy when they nerf or buff it on PTR, because we haven't seen what it was like before yet, right? Obviously, sometimes you can do some math. Sometimes it's pretty obvious. Sometimes it'll say like X damage every X second or whatever, and you can do some math and figure out how much that's going to hurt your health bar. But other times you don't know how many instances of damage a certain mechanic is going to provide. You don't know what percentage of the room is going to be available for certain mechanics, how much the fall off damage falls off on some of these things. So I would say just in general, don't read too much into those data mined changes to bosses. You know, if you see Farok getting massively buffed or massively nerfed behind the scenes on a Wowhead post tomorrow, you shouldn't really update too much on whether you think Farok is going to be too hard or too easy. It doesn't really correlate.
Okay, so let's talk about some predictions that we're going to make in regards to the raid. So typically we do this every single tier where we kind of predict a couple of different things. At the end, we'll probably predict the winner. At the beginning, I want to pose a question. How many melee do we think are going to be on the end boss kill? This is something that we predict from time to time. We predict whether or not a tier is melee friendly or melee unfriendly. In recent tiers, I would say that they've been pretty balanced in regards to, it's been fine for melee. I think Vault of the Incarnates was a rather good melee tier. I think Aberrus
too.
Yeah, you could play melee. Ultimately, it comes down to more balancing than anything else.
Yeah.
How are we feeling about
you want
Amirdrassil?
to? Okay, I'll do this one first.
Yeah.
I think that so the bosses didn't feel melee unfriendly in PTR testing, and often bosses feel worse in testing for melee than they actually end up being.
I agree with that.
So,
yeah.
I think it's actually going to be a pretty melee favored tier, and several of the best specs I think for raid this tier look like melee specs, stuff like Havoc Demon Hunter, Rogue specs, all three, Enhancement Shaman.
Yep.
Yeah, these specs all look really good. So I think there will be 9 melee on Mythic Farok.
God, that's so many. That's
a lot.
That is a lot of melee.
Yeah, like 8 would be a more conservative safe bet. 7 even is still pretty high for melee. Like the average, if you look back over the past 5 years, I think is 5 or 6. So
it's like 5 point something, because typically you get like these melee unfriendly tiers where somebody's playing 4 or somebody's playing 5, and then it's like in a melee friendly tier, it's like we get 7, which is like half the DPS slots. You know, typically like you have about 14 slots allocated for DPS, and if you have like half of them allocated to melee, that's not bad. Even though there are more melee specs in the game than there are range specs, you're typically stacking some of the range specs in some regards. But this definitely seems like a potentially melee stack tier. I think I actually like your reasoning. I think I would go 8. That's
okay.
Generally about where I'm guessing. Now the next prediction I have posed for us, and I wasn't going to tell you about this in advance. Give me the number of evokers that are in on the Farok kill.
4.
I'm also guessing 4. So
right.
Source of Magic is actually quite good this tier. So for those who don't know, healer mana is actually going to be a pretty big thing to watch throughout the whole entire tier. No healer has good mana. There are some healers that have less bad mana, and some healers have some ways of conserving mana with things like Mana Tea and whatnot. But no healer has good mana. Source of Magic is quite strong this upcoming raid tier. In addition to that, things like Innervate and healer mana conservation is going to be quite potent. And Augmentation and Devastation are both just very good specs. I mean, do you want to talk about just like, obviously Aug and Dev are pretty good. Do you really have anything to say?
They nerfed Aug several times over the course of the PTR cycle, so I think it's going to be great, but not insane. But I do think it's still going to be great in the context of Race to World First. I do think it's going to fall off as you start dropping out of like the World Top 100 situation. The spec I think has been nerfed enough that it's weird because it's an easy spec to play, but it still falls off really hard as you get to less coordinated groups where your targets are pressing their CDs less often at the right times, and it ends up being a lot less good in those lower ranked guilds. So it's a very strange situation where the spec is mechanically so simple, and yet it is so. I think it's going to be way better in the Race to World First than in a regular guild.
I think that a lot of strats actually might end up getting defined by how to play Augmentation, specifically for like where you're buffing via Prescience and like standing via Ebon Might and stuff like that. I'm interested in seeing if they really optimize to that level as to like how.
I suspect it'll be at least the like 3 biggest targets, but it's pretty easy as an Augmentation Evoker to buff the right 3 targets because you just Prescience 2 and stand on the 3rd.
Yeah.
maybe you just get a fourth target to then stand on top of your third. And the thing is, if you play 2 augmentation evokers, it's easy because you can just buff the same targets, and you don't they change it so you don't accidentally buff each other. So you can just stand on top of the same 2 people now. Aug evokers don't ever accidentally buff each other, which they used to do if you tried to do that. So you'd have to have a stack of 2 and then the evokers on either side of them. Before now, you could just have a stack of 2 and the evokers be the next nearest 2 people. So the challenge starts to be when you have more than 2 augmentation evokers, which it was looking very possible.
Yeah.
The most recent round of nerfs, I think, has made that not worth anymore, but it remains to be seen. It's definitely still a possibility.
I have some numbers for that. I mean, I was looking basically in the Wowhead content creator, like in the Wowhead Discord, we were talking about like numbers wise, for like what the theory crafting on it, the spec looks like, and they were saying it's somewhere between like a 9% damage nerf. And I've seen some of the numbers that Augmentation was doing in raid testing, like via logs and whatnot. A 9% damage nerf takes them from first place in DPS and moves them down to first place in DPS. So, I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah.
Spec good. We'll see. I think 4 is the most likely situation. Prez is very good. Dev is very solid, and obviously Aug is pretty good. I think this is a great tier for evokers in general. Okay, do you have any predictions that you want to field to the class?
Nope. I'm ready to go to the last one.
All right, Echo versus Limit. How are we feeling this tier? I will go first.
Go ahead.
I will go with Liquid. I think that
Okay.
Liquid is on a bit of a hot streak. I think that like while their performance in Aberrus looked quite strong, if they can continue to build on that performance in Aberrus, I think that it's they looked really good with how they were designing boss strategies and whatnot. And it felt like their Sarkareth strat, their decision whether or not to go dark versus play, and then like it feels like they have a lot of really good backing, not only organizationally but like just with the team as a whole, and it really has kind of felt like they've hit their stride for me, from what I've seen. Obviously, this is somebody coming from the outside. Like, we don't fully know what the ins and outs are, but like coming from the outside, it looks like they've really hit their stride.
Yeah, I mean, of course, it's very hard to predict these things without having been on both teams, right? To know how relatively they've changed.
Yeah.
I do agree, though. Like I'm friends with a lot of people in both guilds, but the Liquid players I know are definitely hyped. I think. There's in previous tiers, sometimes there's been a complacency that's developed for the winning team. And I think now at this point in the race, after the teams have gone back and forth so many times, I don't think there's ever going to be complacency again as long as these 2 teams remain the top ones. So I think I think Liquid will have certainly improved a lot from last year. I think Echo also have, though. I'm going to get kicked out of the building if I say anything other than Echo, so I'll predict Echo. But and it's cold out here in Minnesota, so don't want to get kicked out of the building.
For the Echo side, like they've actually had some roster changes this time. I think that we pulled up like a meme Reddit thread, but Echo has actually added a decent amount more people. I think that was one of the bigger changes that they wanted to do coming into Amirdrassil, was to just like, for the longest time they were running about a 26-ish player roster. I think they wanted to bump that up to 30 coming after Aberrus' offseason, so they've picked up a few new players.
Yeah, there's the team looks strong. A lot of the core is still here. It's not like they lost players or anything like that, but added a few new ones. And I think it's going to be a very close race, right? I think both teams are looking really solid. Of course, Method also a guild to shout out. I know we talked a little bit about them earlier, but also a guild that is looking strong and is ramping. The question is if they're ramping faster than Echo and Liquid are, which that's a challenge. If you're trying to catch Echo and Liquid, you don't have to just catch up to them. They're improving too.
That's such a tough spot for them. Like I don't know. Like I don't know if they're there yet. I think that Aberrus is like a good tier for them to look very good in, because of the length of the race just in general. I think that is a tier that looks great for them. How does it look like in Amirdrassil? I think is it something that they're going to be able to replicate 2 tiers in a row? Because I think if they replicate their Aberrus performance 2 tiers in a row, I think it's like way more serious. Like, oh, okay, hold on, these guys are actually coming.
Yeah, it'll be a big test for the guild, and especially catapulting into next expansion. And then we have a bunch of other guilds. BDG used to be competitive with Method. I don't think they are anymore. I think that is. I think there's now a gap between Method and fourth, like there was between Liquid, Echo, and third for the longest time. And then several other fantastic guilds that are out there and are in the hunt for those top few spots as well. The top 5 is still pretty wide open, right? FSY, St. Dollars, Skyline, a bunch of banger guilds to watch.
Yeah, I feel like Skyline's fallen off a bit too. I mean, for a while we were looking at Chinese guilds like, man, maybe one of them can actually kind of break through.
I mean,
they have bosses, right?
it was a talking point every tier. It never happened. It's every tier though. There was hype around them, but I do think that's finally started to fall off. But it's a region we have the least exposure to on a day-to-day basis, right?
Sure.
So if they had really ramped up for a tier, we would probably find out about it first when they were killing bosses, right? It's like, oh, hang on. These guys are competing for first now. Which,
yeah, I mean, they have bosses.
this could be the tier.
They had Halandris. They killed Halandris World Third. A Chinese guild killed Halandris World Third. I want to say JTH killed Zakul World Third after killing it. And they'll smash pull counts and then just kind of taper off for the remainder of the race. And that's kind of consistent with what we've seen from Chinese guilds for a while.
They've also got the extra giga disadvantage of time start, right? We talked about the EU time difference, but the Asian servers come up like an extra 17 hours after that or something.
2 days and 9 hours.
It is nasty, yeah.
NA comes up in 16 hours. Taiwan, 2 days, 9 hours. Oh no.
Yeah, it's a rough starting position for sure. But
okay.
Yep, those are the guilds.
Basically, yep, we'll be posting this up, I think, about the time that NA goes live, so about the time that Echo NA and Liquid NA start raiding is about the time that this prediction video is going to be going live. It'll probably be going live about midnight CET, maybe a little bit after that for the remainder of the race for World First, basically whenever Dragnus is done casting, so we can kind of like shotgun them out towards the end of Echo's day. And like in the middle of Liquid's day, we're going to be basically covering, what happened that day in the race for World First. Any final thoughts?
Nope.
All right. We'll see you guys tomorrow. Goodbye.
Bye.